I'd been on a really bad first date with a girl that I'd had a big crush on. And my friend's sister was like, you need to go on 50 first dates in the next 2 years, which was, mathematically like a first date every 2 weeks.
Yeah.
And she was like, dating is a skill. So even if you're a great person, if you're not good at dating, you can't show people what a great person you are. And I think that analogy is basically a lot of what we experience. Like, oh man, I know my product. I know I'm the best service person. I know my best friend and I'm so happy for him. And yet I'm unable to communicate that because we're not preparing correctly. And we're stumbling on all of these real and imagined challenges because we didn't think that those challenges were going to be there. And so what I'm really focused on is like, how do you either eliminate those challenges, which I would say is pretty hard, or actually prepare with them in mind?
I'm Srini Rao, and this is the Unmistakable Creative Podcast, where you get a window into the stories and insights of the most innovative and creative minds who've started movements, built thriving businesses, written best-selling books, and created insanely interesting art. For more, check out our 500-episode archive at unmistakablecreative.com.
Introducing Peacock, the new free streaming service from NBC Universal. It's hit movies, current shows, live sports, trending bits, and timeless hits. And that's why you can't not watch. Peacock. Watch for free. Upgrade for more. Stream now at peacocktv.com. Law & Order SVU streaming now.
RX bars are the protein bars with core ingredients right on the front. But since you can't see them right now, picture this. 12 grams of protein made with real, simple food. We have indulgent chocolate sea salt, rich peanut butter and chocolate, and tasty blueberry. But those are only a few. We've got thousands. No, just kidding. But with 16 flavors, there's plenty to choose from at rxbar.com. RX Bar. Simple. Good.
There's more to explore at HomeDepot.com. From furniture to home decor to bedding, shop online and save 10% with the code UNMISTAKABLE10. Plus, get free delivery on select items $45 or more. Visit HomeDepot.com for more info. Buzzy, welcome to the Unmistakable Creative. Thanks so much for taking the time to join us.
Thanks for having me. I'm really excited about this.
Yeah, it is my pleasure to have you here. So I actually found out by way of your publicist about your work and the fact that you were a Jeopardy champion. And given that I have a little sister who is absolutely obsessed with Jeopardy and forces my entire family to watch it every night, and in fact has her own Jeopardy hat, I thought, yeah, this is a no-brainer. Beyond that, I want to have this conversation, but that obviously helped quite a bit. Before we get into all that, I want to start asking you, what social group were you a part of in high school, and what impact did that end up having on the choices that you've made with your life and your career?
I was a part. I went to a pretty small school. I ended up switching from public to a private prep school when I was in 8th grade. And my class size was pretty small. I think we were about 100 people. And in particular, my year was very, we were all kind of friendly. So I was sort of, a classic floater. Like I had friends who were, athletes. I mean, almost everyone played a sport. It was, if you weren't playing football or basketball or something like that, you were fencing or on the swim team or something like that. So I was definitely more of a floater between groups. And I really I think that there were probably people at my school who felt like they were more, it was harder for them to move in certain circles. And I was sort of an enabler of that movement. The other thing is I went to a very, preppy school where everybody was going to become, bankers, lawyers, doctors, that kind of thing. And I was the arty kid. I was a musician. And my junior or senior year, they redid the whole arts wing. And me and two friends who were the only really truly arty people at this school basically had a college level facility to ourselves. So I definitely had a lot of friends who were more musical or visual arts and stuff like that. And I would say that if I had a core crew, is definitely kind of more of the arty out there people.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, being in part of that group, I wonder, did you come from sort of like a typical family who would be from that environment, especially when you're surrounded by kids who are soon to be bankers, doctors, lawyers, whatever it is, sort of the standard, this is how you live a good life narrative. What kind of advice did you get from parents, teachers, peers about potential career paths?
Yeah, I think about I believe it was Borges wrote this essay called The Argentine Writer and Tradition, and he talks about how these groups that are kind of have access to the canon but aren't in the canon have this very powerful point of view. And he talks about Jewish writers, he talks Jewish writers and artists, Irish writers and artists, and then in his moment he felt like it was these South American writers, and he was writing on the cusp of the South American boom. And I feel like in a lot of ways I had that experience. In a lot of ways, like I said, I went to this really preppy, very waspy prep school, and I was a Jewish kid. All of my friends' parents were, powerful people or accomplished professionals. And not that my dad wasn't accomplished, but he owned a clothing store. He was a retailer, third generation retailer. And so it wasn't, we used to joke that all my friends would come over my house on tax day because all of their parents would be miserable because of, they were making all this money. And so I was sort of, I was moving in this world, and I could, but I wasn't really totally a part of it. And I think that gave me the ability to kind of like internalize and observe things without necessarily totally buying into them. And I don't know what any of this has to do with what I'm doing now, but I definitely think that has kind of shaped a lot of who I am.
Yeah. Well, when you get to be surrounded by money and wealth at that level and sort of status and power, what I wonder is how that informed your own perspectives on the role that money and wealth plays in your adult life. Because, I think that as a culture, like wealth is really kind of the holy grail of success, based on what you see in the media, based on what we're in the headlines. I mean, my joke is that every self-help book can be put into one of three categories: make more money, improve your relationships, or lose some weight. I think one of our podcast guests said, get paid later made is kind of the genre, more or less. So I wonder, when you have grown up around this environment, how that informs your own perspective on the role of money and wealth.
I think I just saw how much of a just really wealth and money and all of that is just a point of view in a lot of ways. I think that it's easy to say that when you have money, right? Like my grandma used to have a saying, like, rich or poor, it's good to have money, which I think is very true. And I think, like, I don't want to come off as too privileged, but I think there were a lot of people who I think we've seen it in our society, right? Like, the Bernie Madoffs, where, it's like the emperor has no clothes. And I think that there's a difference between, people who create a life for themselves and people who kind of amass the trappings of wealth. And I've really focused on, like, in my personal life, what kind of life I want to have. And probably have turned down opportunities that would have made me a lot of money because it wasn't really, for me, it was more about what kind of life I want to have as opposed to how much money I want to have. Yeah. Money, it allows you to have a certain amount of life, but it also, like, sometimes those opportunities don't support that life in another way. When I was really, when I was just out of school, I used to do a lot of Buddhist meditation when I was like high school and college and after college. And right when I graduated college, I went on a Buddhist meditation retreat, and I asked the teacher, I was like right out of school. I didn't have a job yet. And I was like trying to figure out what to do. And I asked the teacher, like, just for advice. And he said something that I still think about. And when people ask me for career advice, this is usually the first thing I say, which is that security is easy to find, but freedom is hard to find. And I try to make my choices around that. And I think, in a lot of ways, for a lot of people, and with good reason, money is security. And you can, for a lot of people, you can find the money. There's ways to make money. There's ways to make more money. There's let's say legally and illegally, there are ways to, hoard capital and at whatever level feels like it gives you security. But freedom, real freedom is actually quite rare. And I think that people often run to security and we kind of sacrifice our freedom, our personal freedom, whatever that means, whatever level of freedom we're giving up. And so that's kind of my North Star in terms of the wealth conversation.
Yeah. Well, it's funny to hear you talk about freedom. We had Scott Galloway here, who's a professor at NYU, has become somewhat wealthy, and he was telling me, he said, like he knew two sets of people. I think he a couple who lived somewhere in the South who basically aren't spending all of their money, and they make $50,000 a year, but they've got plenty in savings. Whereas he said, he knew a friend who's an investment banker who, after 3 divorces and kids in private school, he spends everything that he makes. And he said, believe it or not, those other people are actually better off because they're actually free. And right. I think that we kind of equate wealth with freedom, not realizing that, wait a minute, sometimes your wealth comes at the cost of your freedom. Because I think that it's easy for us to see on the surface, what the lives of these people look like as they're portrayed through media. So, we've had Justine Musk, Elon Musk's ex-wife here. And, one of the things that she said to me, she said, I don't think people truly understand the amount of work that goes into these accomplishments. They often come at the cost of everything in your life.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. And I think that, I remember, totally. You see these people driving cars or living in houses, and it's like, you've got to feed that beast every month. You got to feed that every month. And so, I think, like you said, that becomes, can become like a real shackle for a lot of people. And often it kind of blows up, and that's when people have a reckoning. And I'm, knock on wood, I'm lucky that I very early on was able to learn that that wasn't necessarily the approach to take in life.
It's one thing I've always wondered, and part of me wonders if maybe we're not of an age to really contemplate such a deep question. But why don't we talk, when we're younger in school about not, I think we substitute accomplishment for meaning, thinking that meaning is what we'll find through accomplishment, but we don't ever really talk about, what kind of life do you want to live? What do you really want? And maybe it's because you don't I also think it's interesting that, we make high school kids decide what they want to do with the rest of their lives when they have such limited data points. But, having been in the school that you were in and the environment that you're in, why do you think that is? Like, why don't you think that we have these conversations earlier on in education, and it takes, the midlife crisis for somebody to have the wake up call or the reckoning that you were talking about?
Well, I think my guess, and I really don't know that much, definitely speaking out of my depth here, but I'll just say that I think everything in our society is basically, in one way or another, like a business, right? And so if you're a school, if you're a high school, your job is to, get kids into college or get them into, jobs or whatever. And likewise, if you're a college, what you're trading is, a big investment, but the idea is that there'll be a return on that investment. So all of that stuff is getting people focused to very, the kinds of accomplishments, to use your word, and the kinds of achievement that is measurable, right? So, a university can say our graduates, make this much money, average this much money 10 years out of school. And a high school can say we get this percentage of our students into college, or we graduate this many of our, freshmen, we have this graduation rate. Things like fulfillment and things like, meaning are harder to quantize, and thus harder to manage. If you look at it as like a management problem, right? So if you're like a principal and you're trying to show that your school is doing a good job, it's harder to say, these kids are really like caring about their world and who they are and who they want to be. It's easier to say like, we got test scores up and fewer kids are dropping out. And so you focus on that kind of stuff because, you can sell that to your quote unquote investors, whether that's people who you want to come into your school, alums who you're trying to get to reinvest, or if you're a public organization, getting the funding that you need from, the public.
Did you know that with Drizzly, you can actually get drinks delivered right to your door in under 60 minutes? Yep. With Drizzly, the #1 alcohol delivery app, all you have to do is open the app, shop a huge selection of beer, wine, and liquor, and hit order. Plus, you can shop across multiple stores in your area to find what you want at the best prices. Download the app or visit drizzly.com. That's DRIZLY and use code SAVE to save $5 on your first order today.
With the Home Depot, decorating your home is now easier than ever before. Start by heading to homedepot.com, where you can shop for everything for every room. Browse thousands of furniture pieces and decorative accents to fit any style. Explore bedding and bath linens, kitchenware, and small appliances, all at the right prices. Whether you're going for a brand new look or a seasonal refresh, or simply a few finishing touches, the Home Depot has all of the pieces you need. And the best part? Shop today and you'll get free and flexible delivery with easy returns. Plus, for a limited time, you can save even more on the styles you love when you use the code Unmistakable10 at checkout. Find exactly what you're looking for and more at homedepot.com/decor. Valid on select items online only. Free delivery on select items, $45 or more. Visit homedepot.com for more information.
Mm-hmm. So that would be my guess.
Yeah.
Maybe it's cynical.
Well, let's shift gears a little bit and let's talk about how in the world do you go from being a music major at Columbia to becoming a Jeopardy champion? And one thing I always wonder about people on Jeopardy is like, how is it that you become so well read? I mean, my sister shockingly knows insane amounts of answers, and I think her dream is to actually go on Jeopardy. But then she just texted me her questions she wanted me to ask you. But
okay.
Which we'll get to, but how what led you down this path, and what is actually involved in the preparation for this? Like, are you just reading hundreds of books? Like, how do you catalog this amount of knowledge?
Yeah, so I grew up and I always had like a very good memory, but I also really liked when I started reading. I liked going for things like biographies and stuff like that. So I had an interest in facts. And when I was old, and I on road trips, my parents used to give me these like trivia cards, which I think they still make. And it's like, you flip through them, and I was always really into that. And I started watching Jeopardy when I was probably like in middle school, high school. It was on at 7:00 where I grew up, and I would watch it, and then the Simpsons rerun at 7:30. On the other channel, and it was just like part of my day, and I really, really loved it. And then in high school, I found out that there was this thing called Quiz Bowl, and I started doing that, and I was doing it, but in my sort of like irreverent way. So there are people who are very serious quiz bowlers, and I've met some of them, and they scare the crap out of me. But I was sort of like, hey, this is like another way for me to goof off and have fun. And I did okay. I wasn't great, but I was pretty good at it. When I got to college, the Quiz Bowl scene was very serious, so I kind of ducked out of it. But I always liked Jeopardy, and I don't know, Ken Jennings probably has the best statement on this, and I quote him in the audiobook that I just came out with, which is, people who are good at Jeopardy are interested in everything. Yeah. Because it's easy to remember things that you're interested in. And so, I have like 12 Wikipedia tabs up at all times, and I'm like in those wormhole. When Wikipedia came out, I was in college, man, I lost like days of my life, like reading about everything. I mean, and it's funny because this started when I was a kid. I never slept as a kid. Like my mom bemoans that, like, and my grandfather had gotten me the World Book Encyclopedia. And my mom would come to get me up for school in the morning, and there would be a stack of encyclopedias next to the bed. And it was because I was basically doing what we all do now, which is like clicking through the links on Wikipedia. So I'd be reading one article and I'd be like, oh, what's this other thing? And I have to go get another encyclopedia and start flipping through it.
Yeah.
So now it's a lot easier to do that, but I used to have, so I've always kind of just been curious about stuff. In preparing for Jeopardy though, there's kind of like there is a method that is kind of the received wisdom. And then I found that to be insufficient after I had been on and knew that I was going to be invited back. So this book kind of came out of what I learned from trying to make a better preparation process for Jeopardy and then applying that to other things. And then I started talking to people that are smart about it. So the way most people prepare for Jeopardy is they watch the show a lot and they have a ballpoint pen and they practice buzzing in and answering and all that stuff. The reason for that is that Jeopardy has a really particular way that it asks questions, right? So oftentimes a clue will be phrased in a certain way, or there'll be a couple of clues within each clue. And so you get used to the way that Jeopardy asks stuff and also the kind of material that Jeopardy likes to ask about, which is not necessarily the same material that you'll hear at a pub quiz or in Quiz Bowl or any of these other sort of trivia formats. It's got like kind of its own genre of questions or material. So you get used to that stuff. And you get used to the way Alex reads, which is an important part of the timing aspect. What I found wanting in that method is that, sure, it gives you a lot of help for the content, but what it fails to take into account is the context. And the context of being on Jeopardy is completely different than the context of watching Jeopardy. So watching Jeopardy is something you do depending on your market at the end of the day, sitting on your couch, maybe relaxed after dinner, right before dinner, whatever it is. And you watch one show and then you go and move on with your life. Taping Jeopardy happens. You have to be at the studio at 7:30 in the morning, dressed, ready to go. And you tape 5 shows in a day, assuming that you do well. And they're back to back. So you tape 3 shows in the morning, starting after all the briefings and the makeup and everything. You tape 3 shows before lunch and then 2 shows in the afternoon. That's an entirely different situation. You're also standing up. You're under lights. There's 2 other people right next to you. It's not like I always joke, like, it's easy to get all the answers right when you're playing against the dog. It's a lot harder to get the answers right when there are 2 people up there who are really smart. And so, and you're stressed. You're way more stressed. Your brain chemistry is different, all that stuff. And so what I did was I said, how can I replicate as much as possible that experience of actually being on the show? And that kind of led me down this path of like, what else are we kind of preparing poorly for or not preparing at all for? And that's kind of how I got here.
Wow. All right. So I'll get to my sister's weird ass questions in a second, but I want to talk about this idea of curiosity. And, you mentioned that people who are good at Jeopardy are interested in everything. And, I make every single guest choice here on Unmistakable Creative based on curiosity. That is literally the number one filter by which I choose. Like, that's the first question I ask myself when I see a pitch come in is like, am I curious about this? But one thing I've also seen is that people tend to become a lot more narrow-minded as they become adults about subjects that they're willing to explore, curiosities that they're willing to indulge in. And I wonder, one, why you think that is, and 2, more importantly, how they start to get back that sense of curiosity that they, everybody seems to have as a child.
I think I'm probably a little bit an exception to that because since my kind of Jeopardy experience, I've taken on, like, I decided to enter a weightlifting, a national powerlifting competition. And then after I actually won my weight class in deadlift, I decided to take on tap dancing, which I have no dance experience. And so I guess the question could be, why am I willing to do that stuff when so few other people are? I think part of it is and it's kind of back to that like security freedom question, right? Like we tend to like the familiar or things where we feel like we know what we're talking about. Like it's very, very uncomfortable to feel like a novice. And one of the people that I interview for this book is a glassblower named Alexander Rosenberg, who was on that TV show Blown Away. And he teaches glass blowing. And he said that one of the things that he does is he like learns something new, totally as a beginner every 2 years, partially to help him as a teacher, to remind him what it feels like to absolutely have no idea how to do something and how challenging that can be. I think, the older we get, the more we want to avoid that. And I think also as more of our lives are performances for our peers and for the world, we want to do things that we are really good at. We want to, we don't want to fail or fail publicly or be embarrassed. And I think that, curiosity can sometimes be a road to some failure and embarrassment. And that, it's a very understandable and natural inclination to want to avoid that.
Yeah.
But I think we do ourselves a disservice,
Let's go deeper into these two concepts of both memory and preparation. It's funny because I've done a lot of sort of research on memory lately. I mean, as I was telling you before here, I tend to read, tons of books, not just the people I interview, but books that I'm personally interested in. And I've always found that I have an uncanny memory for absolutely useless information that will never serve me any practical purpose. Like one of my roommates jokes that I know his own memories better than he knows of them. Like he'll tell me something and then I'll say, no, that's not actually what happened. He's like, that's my memory. And you actually have the accurate version. Why is that? So I want to talk about one, how do you do that? But what I think is even more interesting is this whole idea of preparation. You seem to have developed a framework for preparation that doesn't just apply to Jeopardy, that we could apply to other things. And I'm going to, ask you to frame it in the most ridiculous practical example for me personally. So, my roommates and I play NBA 2K20 every day religiously, which is ridiculous because I don't even watch sports and I could care less what's going on in the actual NBA. And right now, nothing. But he's had this reign of terror that has continued ever since we've lived in this apartment or in the house that we live in. So if we were to apply my preparation framework so I can finally start kicking his ass again, how would you guide me through that? Which I realize is an absolutely ridiculous example, but I figure since I have you here, I might as well,
Yeah, sure. Why not?
All right.
So as I said, the first thing I would think about is like the context, like what times of day that you guys tend to play NBA 2K20. Think about like, how is that your most alert time?
Definitely not.
Day? Definitely not. So then what I would start to do is there's a method that I've used, which is like kind of dragging your alertness into that time of day. So for instance, if there's something that you tend to do at like an alert time of day. So I'll give you my example. I used to do crosswords every morning and then I started having to do these, when James Holzhauer was on Jeopardy, I was asked to do all these interviews. And they were always at like 11 o'clock on CNN, right? Because it was like after all the real news happened, they wanted to talk about this crazy thing happening on Jeopardy. And I was really tired. So for like during the time that he was on the show, I started doing my crossword puzzles at like 10 or 11 at night to bring my like alertness to that time of day. So what I would start doing is, first of all, find like whether it's reading or checking your email. If there's something that you tend to do when you're alert, start trying to do some of that at the time when you are normally going to play NBA 2K20. That's the first thing. The other thing is I would do is start to break down different aspects of what the game NBA 2K20 is asking you to do. So if there are certain things that you aren't good at, if there are ways to like essentially drills, what are the drills? Because what you're doing is you're just scrimmaging, right, every night, and you're just getting beat and you're not actually building individual skills. You're just kind of like trying to do everything all at once. So if there are ways for you to find a way to drill, and it might be drilling
built into the game.
There you go. So spend some time drilling. I think people tend to overemphasize one or the other. Like they tend to drill a lot and not scrimmage. And then when they're in like a real world game situation, they don't, they can't put it together, or they scrimmage a lot and they're not drilling. So they're not actually like building, they're not doing any skill building. They're just kind of like going through it. those are kind of, that's a balancing act to figure out. And, I mean, I'm just trying to think, because I'm not a big video gamer, so I'm trying to think about like video game stuff. But I think I would start, I mean, that's like a great place to start. And I would also try to figure out, like, I would maybe get on YouTube and watch like, great, you know, if there are people, I know people post or Twitch or whatever, like, there are people who are really good. What are they doing? You know, what are they doing that's different than what you're doing or whatever. I did a lot of that. Like, I think, you know, if you look at, like, think of yourself as an athlete, think of yourself as an elite athlete. I thought of myself when I was getting ready for the Jeopardy Tournament of Champions, like I was an Olympic athlete. Yeah. And I approached my preparation like that. And I think, why not? Like, why not think like I am training for the Olympics of NBA 2K20? And, you know, you go to the locker room and you watch the tape. You know, you watch the tape. You say, oh, that was interesting. Like, how do I do that? And then you kind of try to figure that out. Yeah. And really be systematic about it. The other thing I would think about is ritual. You know, when you're doing the practice stuff, when you're playing it, like how can you build rituals that allow you to reset when something bad happens, or just like make something become like muscle memory? Pitchers do this all the time, right? We see, I mean, I'm not a sports guy either really, but like the way that pitchers like set up in baseball, it's a big kind of like anxiety management and stress management thing, but it also allows everything that comes after it to be kind of automatic. Golf is another thing where like the way that the golfer sets up in front of the ball, or a tennis player, the number of times they bounce the ball before they serve, it's all kind of like queuing up automatic behaviors, right? So as opposed to being in the middle of an NBA 2K20 play and trying to like figure it out, you're like, okay, I'm going to do my like deep breath in, tap my foot, deep breath out, and inbound the ball. And like everything that happens after that is automatic.
Yeah. Well, it's funny you say that, because like the games where my roommate has big leads and I end up beating him are the ones where he starts to lose his composure. Like that is his downfall. He's much better than I am right now, but that I know for sure is his downfall, is that I can keep my composure even with like an 18-point, you know, deficit and come back from it because I've done it. Whereas, you know, when he just starts getting irate, it's kind of hilarious. Like both of us have our
So I mean, what are the ways to needle him too? Like how can you, like in small ways, even, you know, I mean, why not? Like it's a game, right? So play the game. I mean, you know, what do they say? Play the player, not the ball. So play the player.
And shit talking
like what can you?
Pretty common on an NBA floor, from what I hear.
Yeah, totally. So it's like even if he's up by a huge lead, if you do some like goofy move and it just makes him look like a fool, I mean, rub it in his face. I don't know. I'm definitely, you know, part of me is like, are there any cheat codes? You know, like, I'm just like, what, you know, I'm here to like, if winning is what it's about, you know, figure it out. Like, what does it take? I don't know, like, you know, put a little honey on his like controller one night and see if it messes it up. You know, like, I mean, you want to win outright, right? We all want to win outright. So I'm joking, but I'm also like, you know, like think beyond just what's happening in the game as well. Like what's happening with him, what's happening with you. I think, you know, that's kind of part of what goes on in the context stuff. I think part of my success was just like, I being a musician, I think really helped me learn how to like keep my composure on stage, how to work through making mistakes in a performance situation. And so like I could kind of like, I was very kind of nonchalant, or apparently nonchalant, in a situation that was extremely stressful for other people. Mm-hmm. And in a way, my nonchalance made them more stressed, because it kind of heightened their own self-consciousness about how stressed they were.
Yeah. Wow. Well, so for the sake of my sister, I have to ask you her question. Jeopardy, and then we'll go on to a more practical example, because I don't think everybody listening gives a shit about NBA 2K.
With my NBA, do you think my NBA 2K tips will help?
I'll you know what? Let me report back to you, because we literally we play a tournament every week where we pick 3 teams, and you know he's basically held the championship, you know, for 5 straight tournaments, and I'm really annoyed. And my other roommate doesn't give a shit anymore. He's like, you guys are idiots, but But anyway. It's just, I figured, given your background, I was like, this is the
why not?
I want to go to.
I mean, I'm a nut for this stuff, so I'm excited to hear what works and what doesn't.
So my sister wanted to know how you decided what anecdotes you would share after the first commercial break. And then she said some people say the strangest things. And I always wonder what's the one thing you would choose to share about yourself on national TV.
Yeah. So the way it works is they once you get cast to be on the show, they send you a pretty long questionnaire. And it starts out with like, what are 5 interesting things about you, which is supposed to be, that's basically what the prompt for the whole thing is, but people aren't very good at self-assessing. So they start asking other questions like, how did you meet your spouse? Or what was the time you met a celebrity? Or, was there something that happened with your friends in college? They have all these prompts basically to try to essentially get to what are the 5 actually interesting stories about you. And the contestant team basically takes these 10 some odd pages and then puts it into a flashcard that they hand Alex Trebek. When you're in the green room, they go through and they kind of say, are these 5 things okay for us to talk about? So they kind of double check, make sure that you're comfortable with it.
Yeah.
And then they say, I think that, the contestant team says, I think this is the most interesting one of these 5. So I'll highlight it, but you should know that Alex Trebek decides what he's going to talk about. So during that commercial break, he's looking through the cards and he'll see what they kind of highlighted, but he decides on the fly. So a lot of times you'll kind of see people be a little surprised with what he asks. And that's because they thought he was going to ask something and he saw something else that caught his eye. So it's really like, you kind of provide all this biographical detail, and then Alex Trebek decides what he thinks is going to be interesting or what he wants to know about.
Wow.
What's funny is like I was on my initial time on the show, I was on 10 shows, and so they ran out of information. So one of the things that is also an important thing to remember about the context of Jeopardy is that in addition to having to, win a very competitive game under lights standing up, you then have about 10 minutes to go backstage, change outfits for the next quote unquote day. So you're not wearing the same clothes 2 days in a row. So for like a little bit of TV magic. And then eventually after I won a couple days, while I was changing and while I was being told to change faster because they've got a schedule to keep, they were also trying to get more anecdotes and stories out of me while I was changing to add to these cards because they had 5. And after, a couple of days, they want to make sure he's got enough to choose from. They don't want to just tell him to ask about something. Yeah. So I imagine if you're, when you were Ken Jennings or James Holzhauer or whatever, that is even harder to do when you're winning, 40, 70 games.
Yeah. So let's take the preparation framework and apply it to something a bit more useful than NBA 2K.
Sure.
I think a creative skill of some sort. We were earlier talking about the fact that part of what prevents people's curiosity is they're afraid of being bad at something. And I think that's pretty common. But let's actually, you being a musician, one thing I realized that I'd always wanted to learn how to play the guitar, which is a far more versatile instrument than a tuba. And yet my frustration with the whole experience was that, I was an all-state, tuba player. I was really good. And I hate the fact that I'm not able to learn this as quickly as I was, the tuba. Like I went from being, in 7th grade, really average to, missing all-state by 1 chair as a freshman in Texas. And then, but now when I pick up a guitar, I'm like, God, this is slow and annoying. So let's say we were to take this preparation framework to something like that. How would we do it?
Yeah. Well, what I would say is there is really, really good centuries of pedagogy for things like music, sports, and I'm not necessarily an expert in those pedagogies, but what I think is interesting is kind of finding ways to translate those pedagogies to the sort of everyday things. And that's kind of where my focus is. So if you read a lot of these performance books by folks that we talked about, like Anders Ericsson, they love, athletes, violinists, all this stuff, because there's, centuries and centuries of people figuring out the best way to learn this stuff. There's competing methods. And for guitar, likewise, there's all that stuff. What I'm really focused on is, you've got to give a speech at your friend's wedding, and you want to give a good speech. how do you prepare for that? There isn't centuries of pedagogy for preparation of that. There isn't the way that there's 10 different guitar primers and tutorials on YouTube, or you want to give a presentation for work, or you're trying to raise money for your company or make a sale or whatever it is. There isn't that same history of method and process. And so really what I'm focused on, not to not answer your question, but what I'm focused on is how do we, in these kind of everyday experiences, be better prepared so that we can actually do our best. I think most people are, even if things go, or let's say if things don't go well, it's not because they didn't have the ability to do it well. It was that they didn't have the ability to show what they can do. When I was single in New York City, my friend's sister, I had been on a really bad first date with a girl that I'd had a big crush on. And my friend's sister was like, you need to go on 50 first dates in the next 2 years, which was, mathematically like a first date every 2 weeks.
Yeah.
And she was like, dating is a skill. So even if you're a great person, if you're not good at dating, you can't show people what a great person you are. And I think that analogy is basically a lot of what we experience. Like, oh man, I know my product. I know I'm the best service person. I know my best friend, and I'm so happy for him. And yet I'm unable to communicate that because I'm not really, we're not preparing correctly. And we're stumbling on all of these real and imagined challenges because we didn't think that those challenges were going to be there. And so what I'm really focused on is like, how do you either eliminate those challenges, which I would say is pretty hard, or actually prepare with them in mind? I tell people there are potholes on the road. You can either, try to fill all those potholes or just make sure that your car has really good shock absorbers. And my preparation approach is really about how do you build those shock absorbers into yourself. So I didn't really answer your question. So I apologize for that.
No, that's well, I think that's really useful, more so than necessarily answering my question. The thing that I've always sort of baffled by is these sort of learning frameworks and how each one of them are, relevant to different people. Because I mean, even when I look at organizational systems, like when I think about how to organize projects and action items and productivity, it's like, oh, you can try the bullet journal, and you can try this method or this app, and it's like each one I think tailors to certain aspects of a person's personality. And I think that that's one thing I appreciate about having so many different learning frameworks, is that I can draw different things from each one. Like, as ridiculous as it sounds, to me the most valuable thing that came out of this is the potential to kick my roommate's ass at this game again.
Totally. Yeah. And I think one of the things that I really try to emphasize is that I'm very skeptical of this is the way school of personal development, because I think everyone's different and every challenge is different. Things that have worked for me on Jeopardy have not worked for me as well in other situations, and things that work for me are not necessarily going to work for you. And so really what I'm trying to encourage people to do is really experiment with and think about, like, okay, I need to get ready for this. What could my preparation look like beyond, what I was told, essentially what we're told, like in high school and college, to prepare for like a presentation is what we continue to do for the rest of our lives, even though we get smarter and we learn all this other stuff. And so I gave myself a lot of license to be kind of goofy and like not all this stuff worked, but some of it did. One of the things that really helped me get ready for Jeopardy was I would bring my flashcards and my study materials to the gym, and I would have the trainer quiz me while I was doing very strenuous exercises, because I was trying to recreate that stressed feeling of being on the show and your mind going totally blank. And the best way I could figure out how to do that was like hanging from a chin-up bar for 60 seconds. And I don't know how athletic you are, but I'm not a very athletic person. And when I try to do that stuff, I cannot I don't know if I could spell my name in that situation. And so it was like, how do I access the memory, the kind of like trivia part of my brain when I know that information through that kind of like cortisol surge?
Yeah.
That's kind of a silly way to prepare for Jeopardy, but it really, really helped me. And so I'm like kind of inviting people, like, what are some other weird, silly things that might actually like really, really, really help you? You know, one of the things I emphasize for people to do when they have sort of a real performance situation, a public speaking or whatever, is film themselves, because the second you hit record on your phone or whatever, that kind of self-consciousness flips on, even if it's, you know, there's no audience other than the phone. We kind of like all of a sudden, for whatever reason, get really self-conscious. So it's like, what if you did that, but then added another goofy thing, like, you know, you're, you know, in your underwear and you turn on the phone and you're recording yourself. Like, how can we make you as like self-conscious as possible if that's something that you're really challenged by? Like, you know, it's like like a live virus vaccine, you know, it's like by exposing yourself to that self-consciousness, you're essentially taking away some of its ability to affect your performance, because it's not that you're not going to be self-conscious on that day, but it's like, you kind of know, you've already figured out how to deal with it. It's familiar. I think part of what is so challenging about when those stressful situations is not that there's stress, because a lot of those stress hormones actually, you know, should improve your performance. It's that we're so unfamiliar with that feeling, right?
Yeah.
You know, if you think about it, like things like cortisol or whatever, I'm not like a neuroscientist, but all that stuff should like increase your focus, you know, help you, whatever, you know, it's like probably like increases oxygen in your blood and all. I have no idea. I'm talking out of my ass, but you get the idea. All that stuff should make you perform better, but it doesn't. And I think part of it is like, you know, it's such an unfamiliar feeling, because most of our lives we're not stressed. So it's like, how can you create these preparation situations that give you the experience of having to perform in that internal state, so that when you are there on the big day, you're like, okay, yep, I'm stressed, I'm feeling that, but I also know how to do it with that going on.
Wow.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, totally.
Are you buying it or
yeah,
no?
Like I said, I'm going to I'm kind of tired of losing at this video game. So, you know, the inconsistency is pissing me off. So now that you've given me
you know what else you could do?
Yeah.
Have a uniform.
Okay.
Have a uniform that you wear when you play and that you practice in, and wear it a lot. So it's like, one of the things, like, you know, I noticed was when I went on Jeopardy, they ask you to kind of dress like business casual or whatever, but I was wearing a suit and tie, and how many people like don't dress up, and then when they dress up, they're really uncomfortable, and how being comfortable and dressed up kind of gave me an advantage. I started wearing a suit and tie every day, and I still do.
Yeah.
Because it helped me shift my mindset, and also it just made it so like one obstacle of the performance day was gone.
Yeah.
I think like if you decided you were going to like take like a Pat Riley approach and like show up for your tournament like in a suit and tie with your hair slicked back, and you could wear it comfortably, it would at least distract your roommate, if not intimidate
That's
him
hilarious.
a little bit.
It's funny because I was reading. It's funny. He just walked down here to go put some laundry in, so he's going to actually hear this. I was reading Stephen Kotler's book, The Rise of Superman, and I don't know if you've heard. There's a professional skateboarder named Danny Way, and he has basically done the craziest shit imaginable. Like he jumped the Great Wall of China on a skateboard, and when they built the mega ramp, they called him, and they had mismeasured the entire time the project they were working on it. They're like, "Hey man, this thing is going to be like 10 feet longer or bigger than we thought. Is that too gnarly?" And he replies and says, "Nothing is too gnarly."
Yeah.
So I was like, okay, I need to get a t-shirt with that, but maybe that'll be my NBA 2K20 t-shirt.
Yes, exactly. I love it.
So,
yeah.
Cool. Well, this has been fascinating and hilarious and insightful. So I have one final question for you, which is how we finish all of our interviews at the Unmistakable Creative. What do you think it is that makes somebody or something unmistakable?
I think I have kind of like two answers, which are two sides of the same coin. I think, kind of alluding back to where we started, I think freedom. It was on that same retreat, and we were in Brazil, and like this shaman that we visited said, like, you know, people don't want to witness beauty, they want to experience freedom. And that like great art, whether it's like dance or music or visual art, is basically about encountering freedom. I think that an unmistakable creative really embodies that. And I think that the other side of that is that they're really themselves. And I think that freedom is basically the expression of being wholly yourself. And to like circle back to kind of what I'm about these days, like when you're really prepared, you can be more yourself than when you're not. When you're not prepared, you're self-conscious, you're worried, you try to mimic what you think a good performance looks like. If you really are ready to go, you can just be yourself. You can be the most yourself you could ever be. And I think that is more compelling and more powerful and more transformative than almost anything else.
Wow. Amazing. Well, first off, I can't thank you enough for taking the time to join us and share your story and your insights with the listeners. Where can people find out more about you, your work, the new book, and everything else that you're up to?
Yeah. The best thing to do is check out the book. It's called Get Ready. It's on Audible. It's an Audible original. And that's the best thing you can do to find out more about this. Or you can see all the dumb stuff I post on Twitter. That's the other place to find out about me.
And for everybody listening, we will wrap the show with that.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Unmistakable Creative Podcast. While you were listening, were there any moments you found fascinating, inspiring, instructive, maybe even heartwarming? Can you think of anyone, a friend or a family member who would appreciate this moment? If so, take a second and share today's episode with that one person, because good ideas and messages are meant to be shared.